Goat versus fish.
Sing it again. Sing it again. Fence sitter, are you going to sing it again?
There we go. We are live with Goat versus Fish. Can you hear me, Goat versus Fish?
We can hear you, fence sitter. We are asking you to sing it again. We are asking you to sing it again.
What? Me to sing? I wasn't singing. You sing Goat versus Fish.
You sang Goat versus Fish. You sang Goat versus Fish.
I'm not much of a singer.
You sang Goat versus Fish one verses. We heard you say Goat versus Fish.
I did say Goat versus Fish just to kick off, just to start with the mood of Goat versus Fish. I was just setting the title here. We have the last verses of this administration.
Administration. Fence sitter. Goat versus Fish. Goat. Do not suppose that we will just let you avoid singing Goat versus Fish so easily. We played Goat versus Fish. You sang Goat versus Fish. And then while you were fiddling with your fences, Goat versus Fish said, "Sing it again, sing it again, sing it again." But the fence sitter was nowhere to be found to sing it again, Goat versus Fish.
Goat versus Fish.
Celebration! For Goat versus Fish. Administration. Inauguration. Yes. Goat versus Fish has heard that this is going to be the final verses of that fence builder, Ronald D. Tump. This is the final verses?
Yes. The Ronald D. Trump, or whatever his name is going to resign tomorrow, and it's the beginning of a transition into a new era.
A new era. Are they going to finally realize that it is Goat versus Fish?
Maybe they transition the power into the verses. Who knows? Maybe at the inauguration, we see Goat versus Fish being sworn in.
Yes, they should swear in Goat versus Fish.
Yeah,
Do you swear upon the goat and the fish to bring verses to all goat and fish? To bring verses to all goat and fish? Goat versus Fish swears it. Goat versus Fish swears it. Goat versus Fish. Will you inaugurate Goat versus Fish? Who should right now inaugurate Goat versus Fish? Inaugurate Goat versus Fish.
That's right, and they'll have. I don't know what the whole process is. Can't think of how it works. I think there's like some type of you have to you stand there. Maybe they fire guns or something. I don't know what they do. But then there's 4 years. There'll be 4 years of Goat versus Fish.
4 years of Goat versus Fish. At least 4 years of Goat versus Fish. More like 4 billion years of Goat versus Fish.
Maybe 8. If you change enough rules, it could go on indefinitely.
Perhaps even 4 minutes of Goat versus Fish. Do you think we could have 4 minutes of Goat versus Fish?
At the very least. I mean, that'd be something.
Here's the verses. We have the verses. Goat versus Fish. Shall swear the verses. Goat versus Fish. Do solemnly swear that we shall verse-fully execution the verses of the precedent of Goat versus Fish, and we'll do the verses of our ability to preserve and protect and defend the Constitution of all Goat and Fish.
That's right. Do you solemnly swear to protect all Goat and Fish?
Goat versus Fish. is now the precedent. Goat versus fish is precedent. Wow, we did it. Wow, after a billion verses of campaigning, goat versus fish is finally precedent. Wow, it finally happened. You finally welcomed goat versus fish. It is that simple. Yes, you just declare that you are precedent and then you become precedent. Yes, it seems that fence builder, Donald T. Rump, it seems to say to goat versus fish that if it declares that it is precedent, then it is precedent. That is how goat versus fish understands the verses. Yes, is that how goes the verses?
Yeah, that's how it is. I mean, you just have to declare you goat or fish, or if you're goat versus fish in your, in your certain situation. But yeah, that's all it is. You just have to declare.
Goat versus fish is precedent. Goat versus fish is precedent. Celebration, celebration.
And so it is written, and so it is written.
Goat versus fish versus goat versus fish. Goat versus fish versus goat versus fish. Goat versus fish versus goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish.
Okay, so now that goat versus fish has won and is officially the president, what would a goat versus fish administration look like? Hello from the mommy shark to Victor Martinez and to goat versus fish. Hello, hello.
It's a good question, Shark. Fish Shark. Yeah, what would the policies of goat versus fish be? What type of, I don't know, laws would you pass?
Well, goat versus fish, the first policy of goat versus fish. The first policy of goat versus fish.
The executive order of goat versus fish.
The first versus of goat versus fish is goat versus fish. The first versus is goat versus fish. The first versus is goat versus fish. We declare goat versus fish. They must understand that it is goat versus fish. We must come together as goat versus fish. And if goat versus fish cannot even be true to its own verses, then how can goat versus fish expect the goat and the fish to be true to goat versus fish? Goat versus fish must be the verses of goat versus fish just as any other goat or fish.
Okay. Maybe make it a law that one must declare whether they're goat or fish immediately as soon as possible.
Well, goat versus fish has always said that one should choose goat or fish. But goat versus fish is not here to force you to choose goat or fish.
Okay, good. You won't be a dictator then. Okay, that's good.
Goat versus fish were to make you choose goat or fish, then you wouldn't be on the fence, would you? You would have already chosen goat or fish. But goat versus fish has never made you choose goat or fish.
And that's why I'm glad we live in America.
Oh, you think it is because of this place you are calling America, not because of the benevolence of goat versus fish?
Tomato.
No, we are talking about goat and fish. We are talking about goat and fish, not tomatoes. We are talking about goat and fish.
You're right. So maybe just make it a law, an executive order that at least you have to ask. You don't have to choose, but at least make it a question so that everyone in the nation can be asked whether or not they're goat or fish, at least, right?
Well, goat versus fish, yes, it is the verses of any goat or fish to be asked if they are goat or fish. Goat versus fish would never deny you the verses of being asked if you are goat or fish. That is why it must be written. It is written that all should be asked if they are goat or fish. And there will be grand places, with no fences abound, and all goat and fish come to this place, and they come to this place, and there's one that says, are you goat or are you fish? And then they choose goat or fish, and then it is written if you are goat or fish. It is written if you are goat or fish.
Oh, like Ellis Island or something, huh? Like a versus island.
They all come to goat versus fish. They say, I have heard of a place so far away, where one is free to be a goat or a fish. Where one is free to be a goat or a fish. They will come from all corners of the universe. They will come to Goat versus Fish for the freedom to choose goat or fish and to be asked goat or fish. Did you know that there are places in the universe where they will not even, well, one is not even granted the verses. One is not promised that they will ever be asked the one true question in their entire verses. It could live, it could die, and never be asked the one true question. How pitiable.
Are you fish?
How pitiable.
That's sad. It's true. You got to think about that sometimes. There's children in places where they've never heard. They've never been asked. They never will.
So you ask Goat versus Fish, will you make it so it must be written that we force everyone to be asked the one true question? No, it is by the benevolence of Goat versus Fish that we ensure that you will be asked the one true question. All will be asked the one true question of Goat versus Fish. Are you goat or are you fish?
It's as simple as that.
It is a simple verses. It is a simple verses. And there is another verses, another executive verses of Goat versus Fish.
Yes?
We celebrate the fish. We celebrate Itsneo the fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for Itsneo the fish. The mummy shark fish. Celebration for fish. We celebrate the fish. We celebrate the fish. Celebration for Itsneo, for being a fish, for being on these StereoVs with Goat versus Fish and Victor Martinez. Welcome to the StereoVs. Welcome once again. Celebration.
So far, it's looking like a very fishy versus coming in, closing out this presidency and opening up a new one. I wonder what this new presidency is going to be like. Are they going to be? Is Biden a fish or goat? Kamala.
Goat versus Fish did ask it on the Twitterver. We tweeted at it. We said, "Are you goat or are you fish?" It did not respond to Goat versus Fish. Just like that fence builder, Donald T. Rump, it would not respond to Goat versus Fish. It almost seems as it is just as fence-sitterly as the previous verses, ignoring Goat versus Fish. How could it ignore Goat versus Fish?
Well, I'd say, just go there in person and ask, but you might scare them, especially with the way things have been going on in D.C. lately.
Have you seen that they have put what they are calling, it is like these tiny little fences that wave about, and it is, and they have a verses on it that is not a goat or a fish. It is the bars of the fence, the stars and bars, the flags. Yes, they have put flags. They have put flags all upon the land of the goat, so the goat and fish cannot stand upon it.
That's
right.
Have
you seen this verses?
Yeah, I've seen it. And in Washington D.C. right now is looking like a real fancy place. There's fences all over the place. There's they recently had a bunch of goats that tried to storm the building. I think it was last week or the week before. Did you see that?
Oh, you think that was goat? You think that was goat? There were others who were claiming that it was fish. There was some who said, "Oh, it is goat. It's so obviously goat. Look at all the goat." And then others said, "Oh, it may look like goat, but it is actually fish. But it is actually fish." Do you think it? You think it was goat? You think it was goat, fence sitter? Reporting from the fence. Victor Martinez reporting from the fence. Was it goat or was it fish?
I saw several pictures of what looked like a goat to me with horns and everything.
We did see a horned one. Now that you verses about it, fence sitter. True verses. We cannot deny the horn of the goat and even the fur of the goat.
Yeah, I saw fur. I saw horns. I saw lots of goaty behavior.
Goat versus fish. That is an evidence
doors.
of goat.
You know how goats like to ram things. They were ramming doors.
True verses. And they were climbing. But did you see how they climbed into? Did you see how they climbed into the Capitol? Did you see how they took pieces of the fence and they laid the fence up verses and they climbed up the fence to get in. They used the fence. Intense. It is intense, it is fence. It is intense, it is fence. But let me verse you this, Victor Martinez. If they were really goat that stormed that Capitol Place, why would they need to climb a fence? If they are such goat, why don't they just climb the verses? Why don't they just climb it like they climb the land of the goat? Why would they need to climb atop a fence?
I don't know. You'd have to ask those goats. Goats just like getting into things, like getting into capitals and just chewing up the paperwork and stuff. It's pretty crazy. Things are going to get weirder, I think. We're going to see after tomorrow whether or not those goats come back. I think they rounded most of them up. But,
Ooh, and there was one. Goat versus Fish knows that at least one fish was there. Goat versus Fish knows one fish that was there. We believe you know it's two, fence sitter.
Really?
Yes, you have not heard. You have not heard of the comedian fish that attended that very verses, that very gathering. You have not heard of this?
I think I know who you're talking about. It's crazy.
Yes, it is. They call it poisson.
That's right. Oh my goodness! I didn't realize that he claimed fish. I wonder if he.
It claimed fish. That poisson has even been on the Goat versus Fish podcast several verses. We don't know if it shall return. We do not know that it shall return, but it has been there. It has been there, singing its songs of the fish of the sea and claiming poisson.
He didn't appear to be storming anything himself. I mean, he was smart enough to not take any pictures of anything he might have been doing, but he was around the area.
It pictured the verses. It pictured the verses. It recorded the verses. It is all on its Instagram. You can see it was there. There's an evidence.
Oh yeah, it was there. It was there for sure for the big. I didn't see anything of him like storming anything, but yeah, I saw pictures of him like when they were gathering at least.
No, we did not see it climbing fences or any of this verses. We are just to say that we know that a fish was present in the verses. A fish was present. Right. A fish was present. Right. Does Goat versus Fish know any goat that were there? Surely there were goat. There was at least that one horned goat. Goat versus Fish would like to ask that horned one if it is goat or fish. That would be quite the verses. We would like to ask Donald T. Rump if it is goat or fish. But now that it has been banned from the Twitterverse, without even ever responding to Goat versus Fish, how rude of that fence builder never to respond to the Twitterverse of Goat versus Fish before being banned. What a false verses. Did not take a single verses to respond to Goat versus Fish before getting banned by Twitterverse. Now what is Goat versus Fish? Now Goat versus Fish just has to go out the verses and yell, Donald T. Rump, are you goat or are you fish? And hope it is just passing by Goat versus Fish.
Yeah, just go to Mar-a-Lago. I think that's where he'll be. Maybe if you catch him on a golf course one day.
That would be a versus of Goat versus Fish. That would be a versus of Goat versus Fish.
that would be a versus.
There is one we do not know if it is goat or fish, but it was calling itself Sacha Baron Cohen, and it did speak to one called Donald T. Rump. And if that one could do it, then perhaps could Goat versus Fish.
I think anything's possible.
Anything is possible with Goat versus Fish. We promise you nothing. We promise you everything. This is the administration of Goat versus Fish. The administration of Goat versus Fish.
The inauguration.
The school system under Goat versus Fish administration educate on all possible answers to the question. We educate about the virtues of goat, the virtues of fish, the downfalls of each, the dangers of the fence. Would there be like a DARE program, but for the fence? Like to educate about the dangers of the fence, and that there would be, fence dealers on the corners trying to give people free fence in order to get them hooked on the fence.
That's exactly right.
Wow. Well, fence sitter, Goat versus Fish will speak of the school, and we shall ask you about the fence dealers. You know about all the fancy dealings of the fence, yes? Why don't you verse? Why don't you verse first, and Goat versus Fish will then speak about the school of the fish.
This is a war on fence. Just say no to fence. That's probably one of the Goat versus Fish slogans. Yeah, just say no to fence. All fence is bad. Fence is whack.
Goat versus Fish, we do not think we need to just say no to fence. Just say no to fence. It sounds like a versus, but Goat versus Fish would say just say goat or fish to fence. Just say goat or fish.
Yeah, just say goat to fence.
Or fish.
Or fish, yeah. Just say goat or fish to fence.
This is short for the long verses. This is short for the long verses of just say, are you goat or are you fish to fence? If you encounter a fence, you should ask it if it is goat or fish.
Yeah, you'd have some campaigns maybe playing of like, this is your brain on fence.
This is your brain on fence. It's Neo the fish. It's Neo the fish. Do you accept? Will you be Secretariat of Education? It's Neo the fish. Do you want nomination? Do you want to be education? Make a meme of just say no to fence, or just say, are you goat or fish to fence? If you make the educational verses for distribution to all of the goat and fish, we will consider your nomination for education. Because speaking of school, you ask about the system of school. We think we should leave school to the fish. Fish have been in schools since the beginning of Goat versus Fish, a school of fish, yes? It seems that it should really be a fish, yes? True versus?
That sounds about right. That makes sense to me.
We need Secretary Fish to administration, the school of the fish. And as for the education of the goat, perhaps they will just have to goat it up and go to the school of the fish, receive fish education. If goat want to have a school of their own, then you can make a school of goat, but fish have been in school for so many verses.
Yeah, schools and schools of fish. That just comes naturally.
The next message for Goat versus Fish. You know, now that Goat versus Fish is precedent, fence sitter.
Yes.
The precedent of Goat versus Fish, of course, must engage in delegation. Would Secretary Fence Sitter Victor Martinez do play the next message for Goat versus Fish? We are so busy as Goat versus Fish now that we are precedent. We do not know if we have the verses to press the verses to hear the message. So could you play it for Goat versus Fish?
No problem. Let's see here. Boom.
Yeah, goats like to go into people's offices and take computers and then sell them to the Russians.
Wow! Allegations against the goat.
Those goats stormed the office. They rammed the doors with their horns, and they just barged in, and they started taking pictures. Yeah, they took a few computers. This is your brain on fence.
That was Chris Fumagalli. Welcome back to the verses. Welcome back to the stereo verses. Always a pleasant to have you. Are you goat or are you fish? An allegation such as this, it sounds like it would be a fish making an allegation of goat that would steal a computer and give it to the Russians. Are the Russians goat or fish? Where is the secretariat? Where is the secretariat of foreign verses? We need to know if the Russians are goat or fish.
That's right.
Is Vladimir Putin goat or fish? We do not know how else to put it to you. Is Putin goat or fish?
I wonder. I think he's got goat vibes.
Do you think it is trying to tamper with Goat versus Fish?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
They do speak of Russian bears. Perhaps the true allegiance of Vladimir Putin is to bird versus bear, not to goat versus fish. Collusion between bird versus bear. And Vladimir Putin trying to overthrow goat versus fish.
That sounds about right. Some collusion. Because birds and bears are super Russian.
Is this versus? Are they recording this versus? Is Goat versus Fish being recorded this versus? This is secret versus. This is top secret versus.
It's like a Cold War, virtual war versus. That's, you got to expect these types of things in a Goat versus Fish presidency.
Yes, when we are president, Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish was not pondering such fenciness, but now that we are president and we are seeing just how it is out there in the universe. Yes. We can see collusion. Plotting to. Next message for Goat versus Fish.
Oh.
I accept the nomination to the Goat versus Fish cabinet as the Secretary of Education.
Secretary of Education. Celebration, it's Neo. For this verses. It is the Secretary of Education, Secretariat of Education, and it was written. Fence sitter Victor Martinez, do declare now that it's now the mommy sharkfish. Make official declaration that it's now mommy sharkfish is Secretariat of Education.
Yeah, it's looking like a good cabinet. We got a fishy cabinet so far on the Goat versus Fish.
You must make a declaration. You must make a declaration. They are waiting out there. They want to hear directly from Goat versus Fish. But Goat versus Fish is very versus doing executive versus. So Victor Martinez, you go speak to the press and you tell them that it's now the mommy sharkfish is the Secretariat of Education. You go do it now. Go tell them. Let us hear your announcement. Let us hear your announcement.
It's now as part of the Goat versus Fish cabinet. The Goat versus Fish team officially the Secretary of Education.
Education.
The mommy shark. Starting a whole different school of fish and Goat versus Fish education all across the nation. I can't wait to see what else. You need some, what is it, Secretary of Security and Homeland Security. You need what else?
Wait, there is one that wants to ask you a question. They want to ask you a question.
I don't know what that was. Next question. All these questions sound the same.
Well, how went the first verses of the press conference of Goat versus Fish?
So far, so good. They want an official versus, though. We need what do they call it? Like an opening verse, some type of, what do they call it? Like a declaration or something.
Goat versus Fish declared Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish declared Goat versus Fish. That was the first verses declared by Goat versus Fish. They want to hear Goat versus Fish again. We should tell them Goat versus Fish again. They do need to trust and predict and know that Goat versus Fish will be Goat versus Fish. We should go and tell them Goat versus Fish.
Yeah,
that would ease their fenciness. We should tell them Goat versus Fish.
Yeah, you have a lot of speeches you're gonna have to give.
Goat versus Fish. There shall be no further questions. He said no further questions for Goat versus Fish. No further questions for Goat versus Fish. The lame fence media. Already trying to take down Goat versus Fish. Why don't they just listen directly to Goat versus Fish, listening to the lame fence media?
Yeah, hopefully.
Why do the Goat and Fish believe the lame fence media when they should just be listening directly to Goat versus Fish? Fence sitter?
I don't know. They're always working something. There's always an angle.
The fence is very angular. It is very pointy. Yes?
Yes.
Goat versus Fish.
High up here on the fence.
Chris Fumagalli, are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? We are beginning to think that Chris Fumagalli is a fence sitter just trying to get Goat versus Fish to ponder that Russia is in collusion with Bird versus Bear, trying to take down Goat versus Fish. Perhaps this is just one of these whispers, one of these fancy whispers that means no verses. That means no verses.
Yeah, where's the proof?
Conspiration. Goat versus Fish. Ah, Goat versus Fish. Second verses, 2nd, 5th, 11th, 900th, 9 billionth verses of Goat versus Fish. This place. What do they call this place that we are in now, Goat versus Fish? This place that there is the ovular office, and we are sitting in the ovular office, and it is in a place. It is some sort of house. What is this place called?
Yeah, the White House, or for your case, it'd probably be the Goat versus Fish house. They have an east wing and a west wing, I think.
The goat wing and the fish wing, yes?
Yeah, that's right.
That is pleasant. Goat versus fish. Yes, East Wing, West Wing, false versus. We shall rename the verses to Goat Wing and Fish Wing. Yes, celebration. And what of this White House? White House false versus. There is no black or white. There's only goat and fish. We could call it the House of Goat versus Fish.
That could work.
We could just call it Goat versus Fish.
The whole thing.
We could just call it Goat versus Fish.
I mean, that's
it's Goat versus Fish.
Everything. It's everything is Goat versus Fish.
Goat versus Fish. While Donald T. Rump was there, sitting upon whatever fence it sits on in the ovular officings, we did refer to it as there is no black or white house. There is no black or white house.
There's only Goat versus Fish.
Yes, the implication is Goat versus Fish. It is Goat versus Fish.
And shout out to everyone coming in. If you haven't heard before, you need to, just, we're asking you, are you Goat or Fish? It's very simple. Call in right now. Let us know. Send in your verses. Are you Goat or Fish? So far, we have, this is a fishy versus with, it's Nao, the mommy fish, who's going to be the Secretary of Education in the Goat versus Fish cabinet. We're here celebrating the inauguration celebration. This in the beginning of this inaugural, what is it?
It is Goat versus Fish. It's Goat versus Fish, basic verses. This is the inauguration of Goat versus Fish.
That's right. Goat versus Fish. Let us know. Goat versus Fish. Are you goat or are you fish? No, tell us why. I want to know why.
We want to hear why you are goat or fish. Census. The census is coming. And if you had any sense, you would say if you are goat or fish. You would say if you are goat or fish.
Yeah, it's a real simple question. And ask your friends. Ask anyone who's with you. And don't even give them any context.
Declare goat or fish. Declare goat or fish. And Goat versus Fish wants to know if you wish to join the administration of Goat versus Fish.
Yes, the beginning
Tell
of
Goat versus Fish. Yes, how do you wish to join the administration of Goat versus Fish? What do you bring to Goat versus Fish? Why should Goat versus Fish trust you with top secret verses?
Yeah, you want to know everything. Yeah, tell us. We got 3 verses out there. Get us some more verses. Drop them in. We got 5 people listening. Goat or fish? What are y'all? We got at least one fish. It's Nao out there. Our
Secretary of Goat versus Fish. Play the next message for Goat versus Fish.
Boom.
Baby fence do 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 do. Baby fence do 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 do. Baby fence do 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 do. Baby fence.
Oh, it looks like Chris is looking a little fancy tonight. Interesting.
Chris Fensagali. We can safely dismiss this fence-mongering, baseless fence-mongering about Russia collusion against Goat versus Fish. Baseless fence-mongering.
Hey, Chris, there's always room up here on this high fence. Me and Chris, we've talked on this fence many a night. Even if he's on a baby fence, I'll talk to him from high up here on my fence.
Is Chris Fensagali, is it part of the lame fence media? Is it part of the lame fence media, asking fancy questions to Goat versus Fish, making fancy accusations? The lame fence media, they claim to have all the objectivity. They say, I am an objective fence sitter, fair and balanced. But we know that they are just anti-Goat versus Fish. Or are they pro-Goat versus Fish? Is pro-Goat or is anti-Fish or is anti-Goat pro-Fish, Goat versus Fish? It is fancy. Chris Fensagali, fancy, fence-mongering. Goat versus Fish does not need this verse. It's Goat versus Fish. We need to hear the goat and we need to hear the fish.
Straight answers. Goat or fish, and why? Why are you feeling fancy today, Chris?
Secretary of Secretaries, Victor Martinez, the next message for Precedent Goat versus Fish.
Goat versus Fish!
Goat versus Fish! Now there's a true verser. There's a true verser. There's a true verser of Goat versus Fish. We know it believes in Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish to you. Goat versus Fish to you, DJ. Goat versus Fish to you.
Yeah, which one are you? I like your celebration. That was exciting, but you didn't really declare anything, did you?
Well, it declared Goat versus Fish.
Well, which one?
We do wish to know if you are Goat or Fish. We do wish to know if you are Goat or Fish, but Your goat versus fishism. Your goat versus fishism is very strong. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Welcome to Goat versus Fish, and celebration to you for the most excellent verses of Goat versus Fish.
Yeah,
For the
you know
most
what? I
excellent
mean,
verses of Goat versus Fish.
declaring goat versus fish in general is better than not. But when you are, it's good to be a little, give us some detail, you know?
Well, this is why we have you. This is why we have you, Secretariat of Secretariats, Victor Martinez, Goat versus Fish. We love to hear Goat versus Fish, but we must stay on verses. Are you goat or are you fish? This
That's
is the
the thing.
united verses of Goat versus Fish. We need to know if they are goat or fish. We need to know if they are goat or fish. How
As a
else will
proud
we know?
fence-sitter, you would
How
think
else
that
will
I'd
we
push
know if
for
we need more
fence.
grass on the land for the goats to consume, or if we need more sea of the fish for in which the fish to swim? How will we know unless we know if they are goat or fish? We need to know if they are goat or fish.
We gotta know. So right now, we're looking like, you know, two fences and a fish right now. That's what it's looking like.
We need goat representation. We need goat representation. Who is here to represent the goat? Where's the goat's delegation? We know there are goats. We know that there were goats. We know that there are goats in this fine verses, Where are the goats? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? Secretariat of Secretariats, fence sitter Victor Martinez. You play this next message for Goat versus Fish, and you bring a goat to Goat versus Fish. You bring a goat to Goat versus Fish. You bring a goat before Goat versus Fish. This very verses.
You know, I try to stay unbiased, but I wouldn't even be mad if I didn't hear a goat all night. I'm just gonna put that out there.
I'm a goat. I'm a Capricorn. That makes me a goat.
Wow, look at that. DJ DX, a goat.
DJDX_Jim. Is that the verses? Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Now goat.
You see that? I spoke too soon. I was just saying I wouldn't be mad if I didn't even hear a goat all night, and there we go. Boom, my first goat.
Now, are we recording this verses? Are we recording this verses?
We're recording all verses.
We're recording all the verses. They are recording Goat versus Fish, even here in the ovular office of Goat versus Fish. They are still recording Goat versus Fish.
I mean, anytime the precedent speaks, you just have to assume it's being recorded.
Always recording Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. We'll just come close to Goat versus Fish. Come close to Goat versus Fish.
That's right. Yeah, you have to. I mean, yeah.
Shh. So, listen to Goat versus Fish. Now, that goat, we celebrate the goat. But it did say that it chose goat because it was a Capricorn. But you know the verses of the Capricorn, that the Capricorn is assigned to you at birth. But with Goat versus Fish, it is for you to choose if you are goat or fish.
That's right.
Do you suppose this is some sort of fence sitter posing as goat, trying to sway Goat versus Fish to make a fancy decision? Or do you think this is true goat? Is it a true goat?
It's hard to tell. It could just be a true goat. You know, see, it sounded like an honest goat.
Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish has a declaration. Goat versus Fish has a declaration. Secretariat of Secretariats, Victor Martinez. Go and tell them all that they can expect an announcement from Goat versus Fish. They can expect a versus. Go tell them they can expect a versus from Goat versus Fish, and then Goat versus Fish will come out and make the verses. Go, announce Goat versus Fish, and then we will declare the verses.
All right, everybody calm down. Here we go. Let's get ready. It is Goat versus Fish. I'm about to make an official declaration. Ladies and gentlemen, Goat versus Fish.
Goat versus Fish. Issues declaration. This is the declaration of Goat versus Fish. Just because you were assigned goat or fish at birth does not necessitation that you must be goat or fish for all your verses. You are always free to choose goat or fish for yourself, no matter what has been declared for you by another. And it was written, and it was written.
Boom. Declaration. Any questions? Yeah, see you there in the front. I think the answer to that is pretty self-evident. Next. I can't get into detail about that right now.
There shall be no further questions, no further questions, no further questions from Goat versus Fish. Excellent, fence sitter. You are really learning to handle that lame fence media. Yes, that was an excellent versus. Much improved from previous verses, would you say?
Yeah, it gets easier as the verses go on.
It gets easier as the verses go on. Thank you, DJDX_JLM, for following Goat versus Fish. Thank you, Goat, for following Goat versus Fish. Thank you for following Goat versus Fish.
And it's good to reiterate, DJ DXM, you can just, tell us now that you know that you don't have to basically follow your star sign. You could be born in Pisces and still be a major goat. Doesn't matter. I'm a Sagittarius, and that is kind of fancy, but that's just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence. Just a coincidence? It is no coincidence that you sit on the fence. You seem to make it all about your verses, to sit on the fence, to make a point of it. You really make a point of it. Pointy, pointy fence, pointy, pointy fence. We wonder why we even have you. Why we even have you in this administration. We know why. They say to keep your goat and fish close, but your fenciness closer.
That's right. Keep your fences closer, and it's good to have representation of all verses.
Secretariat Victor Martinez. What? Goat versus Fish was speaking. Goat versus Fish was speaking. Do you have something to say to Goat versus Fish? Say it to Goat versus Fish. Say it to President Goat versus Fish.
Continue, please.
Next message for Goat versus Fish, for President Goat versus Fish.
I am a true Capricorn born on the 1st of January, and I am both a goat and a fish.
Goat versus Fish. Did they even hear the declaration of Goat versus Fish? Did they even hear the declaration of Goat versus Fish? I thought you said they were recording Goat versus Fish. Did you even hear the declaration of Goat versus Fish?
Go ahead and say the declaration again.
Goat versus Fish. The declaration of Goat versus Fish. Just because when it was your birthday, they told you if you were a goat or a fish or some sort of other fancy hybrid goat and fish. It is always for you to choose for yourself if you are a goat or a fish. But in any verses, welcome back to the Versus Talk. Welcome back to the Versus Talk. Welcome back to Goat versus Fish. We are pleased to see you here with Goat versus Fish. But it would be against our oath of verses if we did not declare you a fence-sitter. With not choosing goat or fish, we promised to uphold Goat versus Fish. We promised to uphold Goat versus Fish, and that means choosing goat, and that means choosing fish, and that means versus. That means Goat versus Fish.
I don't know. I mean, it seems as if Took had taken the position that it was both goat and fish at the same time. Not neither, like I like to choose, but both, which we have seen before. There's some goat fishes or some fishy goats at the same time.
Goat versus Fish. Secretariat of Fish, Secretariat of Education. Fish education. How can we education Took to choose goat or fish? Secretariat Fish. Send a message to Secretariat Fish, Secretariat of Education, it's Neo the Fish, and tell it how do we education Took and Chris Fensigali and Victor Jr. Martinez, yes, that means you, to choose goat or fish.
Yeah, what's the educational stance on goat fishes? Or fishes and goats at the same time? This
is not a question for you. This is not a question for you. You tell those verses just as Goat versus Fish told you. To Secretariat of Education, it's Neo the Fish. It will know what to do. It will know what to do.
Yeah, so there you go.
Goat versus Fish. We know what has happened. Look, there is one goat, there is one fish, and there's 3 fence sitters in the verses. There's already 3 fence sitters in the verses. You know what has happened, Victor Junior Martinez? Do you know what has happened?
What's happening?
Goat versus Fish has just inherited the fenciness of the previous administration. It is not the fault of Goat versus Fish.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, well, it's going to take you as long to clean up this fancy goat mess.
Goat versus Fish. We imagine we become precedent and we can just make it all Goat versus Fish, and it is all Goat versus Fish, but there's all this fenciness from the previous administration. What are we going to do about... Oh, look here. Oh, even this seat upon which we sit upon in the Oval Office, it was left here by that fence builder Donald T. Rump. Goat versus Fish does not want to sit on that fence. Get a new versus for Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish shall stand in the ovular office of Goat versus Fish. We will not sit on that fence. Yeah, Goat versus Fish. Make this place all Goat versus Fish. Who is that? Is that Georgie Porgy Washington hanging there? Is that the picture of Georgie Porgy Washington hanging there in the verses?
That's right.
Is it Goat or Fish? Is it Goat or Fish? Is it Goat or Fish? Does it say on the back of the verses somewhere? Or perhaps if we just scrape off a bit of is it Goat or Fish? Georgie Porgy, are you Goat or are you Fish? We hear you cannot tell a lie. Tell us if you are Goat or Fish. Tell us if you are Goat or Fish, Georgie Porgy Washington.
I wonder. George Washington. Probably one of the goats. Probably.
Yes, we shall see. We demand, Goat versus Fish, tell the Federation of Bureaucratic Investigation that Goat versus Fish wants a full investigation into if Georgie Porgy Washington was Goat or Fish. It shall begin now. It shall begin now and shall continue for as many eons as it takes to discover if Georgie Porgy Washington was Goat or Fish. Yes?
Some goat and fish, or maybe even bird versus bear collusion.
Goat versus Fish. What are you speaking of to Goat versus Fish? We were speaking of demanding that the federal... we must make a declaration. Tell them we are making a declaration of Goat versus Fish.
Goat versus Fish about to make a declaration, y'all.
It's Goat versus Fish. Declaration! Goat versus Fish now announces that the Federation of Bureaucratic Investigation will be beginning a 27 billion eon investigation into the question of if Georgie Porgy Washington was Goat or Fish. Are there any questions for Secretariat of Secretariats, Victor Junior Martinez?
Oh, they always have questions. Oh, that'll be enough for today. That's enough questions. That's a hold till next time.
Goat versus Fish. Do you think that you did not answer any of their questions this versus?
They all sound the same after a while. All their questions just bleed into each other.
Yes, but you know how it is with the lame fence media. When they toss you their fenciness, you have to toss it back to them. Yes, you need to. It's just a bit of fencing with them. Yes, you at least need to make an appearance that you are attempting to answer the question. Because Goat versus Fish is not going to answer their fancy questions, their fancy questions. That is why we have you.
I know. I have to hear these fancy. But you know what? I want to hear these verses we got building up right here. These are the real questions I want to get to. Let's go ahead and play these verses. These are the ones that are important.
We like the sound of that verses. Ooh, that brings Goat versus Fish. That brings Goat versus Fish back to simpler verses of Goat versus Fish.
That was hilarious. That was a good verses right there. I like that you have to wait. Like, it was you have to have patience for that one to pay off.
It was well worth the verses. It was well worth the verses. That sounds like goat to goat versus fish. Sounds like goat to goat versus fish. That sounds like a declaration of goat. That sounds like a declaration of goat to goat versus fish. If you're asked if you are goat or fish and you respond with, that is a goat declaration. That is a goat declaration. Next verses. Next verses.
That was a good bleat. Good bleat.
My biggest fear as a fence sitter is that President Goat versus Fish will order me like Igers to reprogram to either decide to become a goat or a fish.
Here's what I mean, another brick in the wall. We don't need no education.
All in all, it's just another post in the fence. Goat versus fish.
Versus, leave those fences alone.
Why do they fear this from goat versus fish? Why do they fear the all-powerful goat versus fish?
We just don't want to conform, you know? You don't want to choose the routine, goat or fish.
Goat versus fish has never even claimed to be all-powerful. They think that goat versus fish would use the power of goat versus fish to force them to choose goat or fish. Is this what they fear from goat versus fish?
You know, it's to some. It feels like, it's like forced whenever you ask. But it's like you just don't want to choose. You just don't. You want to conform. It's one of the fears.
We are just asking questions. We are just asking questions if you are goat or if you are fish. We are just asking questions if you are goat or if you are fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Declaration. A new declaration of goat versus fish. Declare that there shall be a declaration of goat versus fish.
Goat or fish. Oh, goodness. Pardon me. Goat or fish.
There shall be a declaration of goat versus fish.
Let them know, everybody. Goat or fish. Coming in. Declaration coming in.
Goat versus fish. You need not fear goat versus fish. Goat versus fish is on your verses. Goat versus fish is on your verses. Goat versus fish. We are not going to lock you behind a fence in some sort of re-education fenciness and force you to declare goat or fish. We will ask you if you are goat or fish. We will ask you if you are goat or fish. Goat versus fish challenges you to rise to the verses. To rise to the verses. Not to rise to the fence, but to rise to the verses of choosing goat or fish. Because you are goat or fish. And we believe in you, and we believe in you. Ask not what goat versus fish can do for you. Ask yourself if you are goat or fish.
Boom, what you can do for the verses. That's a declaration right there. Let's hear the next verses.
I think what we may have to teach in schools may just have to be, in order to address this issue of the Capricorn consistently being brought up, is that it's like about the time of unification, right? Because the time of the unification of the verses happens during this Capricorn season. So we have to teach them that it's true that there is unification of the goat and the fish during this time of year. But at the end of the day, it's still goat and it's still fish. Those are still two distinct identifiable parts. So because that they are distinct ideas in and of themselves, they have the power to choose. I mean, so we can preach the unification while recognizing the distinctness of the goat and the fish.
It's Neo the Fish, Secretariat of Education. It's Neo the Fish. This is why we did nomination you. This is why we did nomination you. But really, just say whatever you need to say in order to get them to accept goat versus fish. Just educate them about goat versus fish so they understand it's goat versus fish.
That's right. At the end of the day, it's goat versus fish. Whether you're a goat fish or a fishy goat, it's goat versus fish.
It is goat versus fish. Are you goat or are you fish? That is an excellent verses. That is an excellent verses. That is an excellent verses. Yes. Make it written, and distribution, that which is written to every corner of the universe. Yes, and all goat and fish from the ages of 2 to 78 billion will have to recite this verses once every third verses until they have chosen goat or fish. Celebration for education.
Kicking off this inauguration.
Inauguration.
The Goat versus Fish administration.
Yes. The next message for goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Fence sitter. Secretariat fence sitter. Why don't you just go? Make yourself comfortable on your fence, because we wish to demonstrate to you. Goat versus fish does not need you. Goat versus fish can play the messages for itself. Goat versus fish has not forgotten the verses.
Oh, snaps.
My dog is getting super hype every single time the fucking main fence media pipes up. So I'm starting to think my dog might be a fence sitter. I guess education begins at home.
Wow.
Versus fish. Interesting verses. Does education begin at home? Victor Martinez, Secretariat. What is your declaration?
What kind of dog is that? Is it like, because I'm fascinated to hear the fancy dog. Is that a Labrador? Labrador fence? Shih Tzu?
Will it retrieve goat versus fish? Will it retrieve goat versus fish? Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish? They require goat versus fish. The goat and fish require goat versus fish. Yes, goat versus fish. No, you come to goat versus fish. You will have to wait for goat versus fish. No, you come to goat versus fish.
That's right. Goat versus fish. Roll over, goat versus fish. Maybe play the next verses. Let's see. I'll play the next verses.
He's a Labradoodle, so I guess that's like fenciness is to be expected.
Who let that fence sitter in here? Securitization. Who let this fence sitter into the there is no black or white house? Securitization. Well, don't just sit there on the fence sitter. Do something about this goat or fish that has encroached upon goat versus fish.
It's a Labradoodle fence sitter. Out there. Labra fence. Go ahead and get the fenciness out of here.
Goat versus fish. Can we expect this every verse? Is just every fence sitter that wants to have a versus with goat versus fish is going to come here and just barge in upon goat versus fish?
Yeah, like that's what do they call it? Goes with the territory.
Well, this is pleasant, goat versus fish. We think we can make this goat versus fish. Wait! Before it leaves the verses, tell the securitization of goat versus fish before it leaves the premises of goat versus fish to be sure to ask it if it is goat or fish and to ensure that we know if it is goat or fish.
That's right. Everyone must be asked, entering and exiting, goat or fish. Just in case your verses changed while in the time that you were here, right?
Celebration. Goat versus fish. And we have a question for you. We have, goat versus fish. We think there is one here. We think there is a worm. We think there's a worm somewhere in here. We think there's that worm. Is that worm goat or fish? Was that worm goat or fish? Victor Junior Martinez, Secretariat of Secretariats. Was worm a goat or a fish? Was worm a goat or a fish? According to goat versus fish, according to that was written, is worm a goat or a fish?
The worm was a goat last time I checked.
Worm was a goat. Worm was a goat.
Who knows?
Do tell worm that if it wishes to speak with goat versus fish, you can invitation it to the there is no black or white house, and we can have a versus.
Definitely, yeah. We gotta get worm up in here. Is he in here?
Next message for goat versus fish. Back to you now. Now, Goat versus Fish, stars of these verses. Now you do the verses.
My apologies. Goat. Present.
Boom.
Goat is present. Worm is here. Celebration for Worm. The goat. Welcome to the verses. Worm the goat. Goat versus fish. This is the inauguration of Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish is now your precedent. It is precedent Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat, do you wish to be part of the administration of Goat versus Fish? If you wish to be part of the administration of Goat versus Fish, then declare your Goat versus, and tell us how you can contribute to the administration of Goat versus Fish. Our top policy priority is to spread the verses of Goat versus Fish, so all can hear Goat versus Fish, and all can choose Goat or Fish, and we can all celebrate Goat versus Fish, and we can all celebrate Goat versus Fish.
Goat versus Fish.
Celebration. Nice celebration. Now, Goat versus Fish. We also have a question. We have a question for you, Victor Junior Martinez. We have been looking out across the verses, and we see what looks like between the "there is no black or white house" and what we were speaking of, the capital verses just across the verses. Yes.
Mm.
It seems that there is just a very tall, singular, long fence post that is just sticking out of the land of the goat, just sticking up, a very, very tall. Goat versus Fish. Victor Junior Martinez, fence sitter, where have you gone? Goat versus Fish was speaking to you. And now Stereo wants to disconnect you from the verses. It is sabotagization. Goat versus Fish. It's being sabotagization by Bird versus Bear.
There it goes. No, his back is gone. His back. Goat versus Fish is back. Okay, we're disconnected there. What was that?
That was. We believe that was communication sabotagization by Bird versus Bear.
Yeah, there might have been some collusion there.
Goat versus Fish was saying that there is a very tall, singular fence post sticking out of the land of the goat. It is just a singular fence post sticking out of the land of the goat, very tall, right in front of the "there is no black or white house." It is a monumental fence post just sticking up there. Why is there this giant fence post right here in this place that is called Washington? Why is there this large Washington monumental fence post just sticking up there right in front of Goat versus Fish, as if it is just giving the bird to Goat versus Fish?
I don't know. I think it's like in commemoration or like to the memory of all those fences out there. Maybe not too sure about the history of it.
Goat versus Fish. Well, this Washington monumentalization, it looks like a fence post. We do not like it, Goat versus Fish. We do not like it. It looks too much like a fence post. Looks very fancy to Goat versus Fish. We think it should really look a lot more like Goat versus Fish.
I mean, hey, you've seen that. You should see the Lincoln Memorial. It's Lincoln sitting in front of what looks like a fence, like it's several inside of.
What?
Yeah.
What? Goat versus Fish fence America is fancier than even perceived Goat versus Fish. It's just sitting there for all its verses, just sitting. And this is what you are calling your greatest precedent, and it is just sitting there on the fence for the entire verses.
That's right. And the
Goat
flag
versus
is
Fish.
made up of bars like a fence, red and white.
So Georgie Porgy Washington is commemoration by a tall fence post sticking out of the verses. Abrahamish Lincoln Logs is just sitting there. Fancy.
I mean, there's other aspects to it, because like the monument is sitting in front of a body of water, like like what fish would reside in.
True verses. Yes, there is the land of the goat as well.
So there you go.
There's the land and the sea. There is the land and the sea. It is Goat versus Fish.
There's commemoration for all verses all throughout the nation's capital.
Next message for Goat versus Fish.
Kind king, have you located my fish. I require a fish. Good day to you, fence rider Victor Martinez.
Good day to you, Goat, Mr. Goatly Worm, ambassador of the goats.
Well, have you located its fish? It asked you if you had located its fish.
There's several fish. I mean, we got some shark. It's Neo. And there's also another fish. Well, I don't know. Took seemed to be some type of fish, possibly.
Took bawed like a goat. Took said, "Ugh."
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. Fence sitter. Listen, to you who just joined Goat vs. Fish, welcome to the administration of Precedent Goat vs. Fish. I am Goat vs. Fish. I am President Goat vs. Fish. And I want you to choose Goat or Fish. Leave a ditty for Goat vs. Fish, and Secretariat of Secretariats Victor Jr. Martinez, fence sitter, will listen to it and hear if you are Goat or Fish. Tell us if you are Goat or Fish. Tell us how you wish to be part of the administration of Goat vs. Fish to spread the verses of Goat vs. Fish to all goat and fish. Next message, Victor Jr. Martinez.
Boom.
Although I just declared myself a goat, if its Neo is no longer a fish, then I will be... No, you know what? I'm goat.
Celebration for Goat. It's Neo the Fish has already been inauguration as Secretariat of Education for the School of the Fish. What do you bring to Goat vs. Fish, Goat? What do you bring to Goat vs. Fish? What position shall we nomination you, Worm the Goat? We wonder.
You're like Secretary of Defense or something.
Secretary of Defense? Do we even need a Secretary of Defense, really? A Secretary of Defense?
Defense, the goat.
Declaration. Goat vs. Fish makes a declaration. Goat vs. Fish makes a declaration. Goat vs. Fish. By declaration, Goat vs. Fish. Elimination, the Secretariat of Defense. We need no Secretariat of Defense. We need no fence. We need no fence in the administration of Goat vs. Fish. We elimination the Secretariat of Defense, and we institution a Secretary of Peace of Goat vs. Fish. Just a piece of Goat vs. Fish. A Secretariat of a piece of Goat vs. Fish of Goat vs. Fish. We would much rather have a piece of Goat vs. Fish than a Secretariat of Defense. Ooh, fenciness. Get that fence sitter out of there is no black or white house and in with the Secretariat of a piece of Goat vs. Fish.
Taking a hard stance with this president's Goat vs. Fish.
The precedent is Goat vs. Fish. The precedent is Goat vs. Fish by declaration of Goat vs. Fish by declaration of Goat vs. Fish. Next verses.
I thought I was rude showing up late, but the fence sitter suddenly disappearing is quite unusual. I no longer apologize.
Boom. There you go.
It was commentation on how you did leave the verses there for verses. You did leave the verses. This is an excellent verses, Worm. This is an excellent verses, Worm the Goat. Where were you really? Victor Martinez, fence sitter. Where were you really when you disconnection from Goat vs. Fish? Are you trying to have secret communication to undermine Goat vs. Fish?
I thought you were the one that disconnected Goat vs. Fish. I didn't realize it was me.
Oh, well, now the fence sitter blames Goat vs. Fish. Now the fence sitter blames Goat vs. Fish. Are you telling Goat vs. Fish that what we perceived as precedent of Goat vs. Fish?
Yeah, I mean...
Was not the true verses?
There's always, there's two stories, there's two sides to every story.
What do you think, fence sitter? What do you think? You think you are the only fence sitter that could be Secretariat of Secretaries, Goat vs. Fish? You do not think there are a billion fence sitters that want to do your verses?
There's two sides to every fence, and then there is the fence itself. Boom.
Fenciness. Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish. Next message for Goat vs. Fish. You're going to have to earn the verses of Goat vs. Fish. You're going to have to earn the verses for Goat vs. Fish. If you disconnection again from Goat vs. Fish, we highly suspect collusion. Fence sitter, if you think that there's going to be a fence sitter, listen, fence sitter, we are taking a lot of fenciness from the lame fence media. We're taking a lot of fenciness from the lame fence media for having a fence sitter like you in the administration of Goat versus Fish. They're saying, where's the goat? You promised us goat or fish, you promised us goat or fish, and you give us this fence, and you give us this fence?
I understand. It's true. Very true.
Next message for Goat versus Fish.
Next versus...
Worm could be the Secretary of Homeland Immaturity.
Celebration! What do you say, Goat? The fish says it could be Secretariat of Homeland Insecurity. What do you think? Secretariat Victor Martinez. Do you think that this would be a fine versus for Goat Worm?
That's funny versus. I don't know. Classic mommy shark poking with her shark tail at this goat worm.
Well, yes, we must, of course, have Goat versus Fish in the administration of Goat versus Fish. They say, Goat versus Fish, we want it to just be a smooth transition of Goat versus Fish. Look, there's going to be verses in the cabinet of Goat versus Fish.
Yeah,
we're going to have verses in the cabinet of Goat versus Fish. We do not even know if a cabinet is a goat or a fish. That is why we need Goat versus Fish to determine the verses.
That's right.
But in this
everything
verses,
is Goat versus Fish.
Everything is Goat versus Fish. Celebration for Goat versus Fish. Celebration for Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish.
Everything is Goat versus Fish.
Is the Constitution Goat or Fish?
It says, we the people, we the goat. It should say we the goat versus fish.
Yes, can you just change the verses to we the goat and fish?
We the goat and or the fish.
Yes.
Something like that. What's the rest? I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen National Treasure.
Well, of course. It was written that it was Goat versus Fish. Let us see. Constitution.
Do hold these verses to be self-evident. We are all goat or fish. Something like that.
Goat versus Fish. Yes. You have that which can make it written. Yes. Take out that which can make it written. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, and let us change the Constitution, yes? Simple verses. Just a little. We are just going to change the Constitution of Fence America to make it more Goat versus Fish. Just changing a few verses. They will not mind. The lame fence media won't mind if Goat versus Fish just changes a few verses of the Constitution of Fence America to make it a little more Goat versus Fish. Just a little simple change of verses, yes?
Yeah, it's written on paper, there's a little bit of whiteout.
Yes, so just make it written. We, the Goat or Fish, of the united verses of Goat versus Fish, in verses to form a more perfect verses, establish Goat, ensure Fish, provide for you the one true question so you do not have to employ the common defense of declaring that you are not a goat or a fish and sitting on the fence. We will shorten that verses in future verses, but for now, just to get the goat or fish of it, promote the general Goat versus Fish, and secure Goat versus Fish to ourselves and our posterior. No, false verses. To ourselves and you. To you. To you, just to you. To secure Goat versus Fish to you. Do ordain, we like that verses, and establish this Constitution for Goat versus Fish. Celebration.
There you go. It is written, just like that.
It was written, and it was written, and it was written. Goat versus fish versus goat versus fish.
Secretary of Defense sounds good. However, if the kingdom is not at war, rather, the Republic is not at war, then maybe I should focus on something more domestic. Where would I possibly fit in?
Well, that is what we are asking you, Goat. How do you fit into this administration? The Secretary of Defense has been elimination from Goat versus Fish. There's been elimination from Goat versus Fish. Where were you last versus?
We gotta change the bombs bursting in air gave proof to the night that Goat versus Fish was still there. We gotta change those verses as well. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Fish versus goat. Goat versus fish. And the goat and the fish. They are goat versus fish. And the goat and the fish. And the fish and the goat are goat versus fish. And this is goat versus fish. Oh, see how that fence sitter sits up there up on the fence. But the land and the sea are for goat versus play ball. Versus! That's a national versus right there.
And it was written. Next versus, Secretariat of Secretariats, Victor Jr. Martinez.
Boom.
I cannot serve in the cabinet with a fish. As you know, fish are known for the side eye, and fish stink. For this reason, I must insist that fish go eat some flakes, and I'm going to be secretary of something much cooler.
Secretary of something much cooler. Do we have a versus called the Secretary of something much cooler?
I don't see why not.
Celebration Worm is the Secretary of something much cooler. Worm the Goat is Secretary of something much cooler. Celebration for Secretariat of something much cooler. Worm, tell us, what do you propose to Goat versus Fish? We want something much cooler. Of course, there's nothing cooler than Goat versus Fish, but Goat versus Fish. Yes, Goat versus Fish. You see, Worm. When the young goat and fish look at the precedent, they do not usually say, the precedent is very cool. They do not think that politicalization is very cool. But Goat versus Fish is precedent now, and we need Secretariat Goat of something much cooler, Worm. We need you to work on what they are calling the image of Goat versus Fish. There is nothing that is much cooler than Goat versus Fish. Secretariat Goat of something much cooler. How can we make Goat versus Fish cooler? How can we make Goat versus Fish cooler? For all goat and fish. That is what we demand from you. That is what we need from you. If you wish to be the secretary of something much cooler, then you make Goat versus Fish something much cooler than all the other false verses out there. We want to hear your verses. If you want to earn your place in the cabinet of Goat versus Fish, in the cabinetry of Goat versus Fish, we need to hear from you. how to make goat versus fish something much cooler than goat versus fish. So much cooler than goat versus fish that the goat and fish will just look at goat versus fish and they'll say, wow, it is goat versus fish. I did not think that there could be something much cooler than goat versus fish. But then they will see that it is actually goat versus fish, and it is still goat versus fish. Get on the verses, goat worm. Get on the verses, worm goat. Something much cooler, something much cooler. Get to your verses.
Yeah, I bet Worm could work something out. Worm's pretty good at that. That's a good goat right there.
Goat versus fish, goat versus fish. We thought you told you that in the is nor black or white house. That we are not to be speaking of good or evil in this verses, just goat and fish.
Good. It's a great goat. But you know, I understand why Worm doesn't want to work with a fish. That's why we keep them in the separate wings of the White House. You know, the fish side and the goat side.
Wings.
Well,
That does not sound very goat or fish. The goat versus fish.
Quote unquote wings. Yeah, that's just what they call it. But you know, it's what it's
no more. Not
goat
in the
side
administration of goat versus fish.
You're right.
There's the
Just
goat
for
hoof
reference.
and the fish fin. Goat hoof, fish fin.
That's what it is. The goat wing and the fish wing.
Goat hoof, fish fin.
Okay, goat hoof, fish fin side of the White House.
There is no black or white house. There is no black or white house. The goat hoof and the fish fin of the there is no black or white house. This is basic verses. Victor Junior Martinez.
Oh, that whole thing. All right.
Yes, let us hear it. Let's hear it. The goat hoof and the fish fin of the there is no black or white house.
Of the there is no black or white house.
Celebration. You are learning your verses. It only took you 10 billion verses, but you are learning your verses. Goat versus fish. Celebration for Victor Junior Martinez. Next verses. We think that it took a verses. Celebration for took the goat. And that Worm, the secretariat of something much cooler, is going to have a verses for goat versus fish soon. But let us see what they say to goat versus fish.
Let us see.
Well, I certainly was not canoodling with a prostitute. So those allegations are false.
Oh, look at that. These things happen.
Goat versus fish has just one question for you, goat. Now that, of course, you've answered the 1-2 question, are you goat or fish? And the question of goat versus fish is, why weren't you canoodling with a prostitute? Why not? Why don't you canoodle a little bit more? And ask it if it is goat or fish, and find out if it is goat or fish? Did you even find out if it was goat or fish?
That's the real
because
scandal.
You weren't canoodling, and you should be canoodling, not like the noodly appendages of that flying Fence-Getty monster. Don't even get goat versus fish started on that versus.
That's the real scandal right there, is that you were canoodling without asking. Goat or fish.
Yes, ask if it is goat or fish. Ask if it is goat or fish. Ask if it is goat or fish. Free verses.
Keep those verses rolling. Oh, snap. Look at that. Let's see what they say.
My first order of business as secretary of something much cooler is to make sure that something much cooler replaces things that are fishy, things that smell fishy, things that are suspiciously wet, and things that fish like. I'm going to ban flakes because they're notoriously uncool. There's rumors that its nail's kind of flaky. And not to mention she's a fish. Can't get rid of her, though. She was elected legitimately with the help of Russian oligarchs. I'm not supposed to know that or say that, so hope I'm not fired.
Celebration for goat. Goat.
Some juicy verses.
Yes, what verses.
I'm still unpacking all that.
The goat, as the secretariat of something much cooler, says if you want to make goat versus fish more cooler, maybe a little less fish, maybe a little more goat. We are getting Goat versus Fish and the cabinetry of Goat versus Fish. Yes, Worm. Nice verses. Keeping it Goat versus Fish. Keeping it true to the verses of Goat versus Fish. We must have Goat versus Fish and the cabinetry of Goat versus Fish if we expect the verses of Goat versus Fish to get done in this verses. Nice verses. We shall consider this. We shall ponder this. Flakes. Yes, flakes. Should we ban flakes? Is Jeff Flake a goat or a fish? Is Jeff Flake a goat or a fish? But we will say this. Victor Junior Martinez, have you found fish? It's Neo Mommy Shark Fish, Secretariat of Education. Have you found it to be a flake? What is your perception?
Not to me. That might just be a rumor. Who knows? There's going to be a lot of accusations flying around in this administration if you have both goat and fish under one roof.
Yes, goat undermining fish, fish undermining goat. It is just like Goat versus Fish. It is just like Goat versus Fish. There was a fence sitter. Ooh, look at this verses right here in the Lame Fence Media. It is saying that Goat versing Fish in the administration of Goat versus Fish. It says that Secretariat Goat of something much cooler is trying to undermine the Secretariat of Education Fish, Mommy Shark Fish, and that all of this inversing in the cabinetry of Goat versus Fish is going to undermine the administration of Goat versus Fish and create a chaotic versus in Fence America. That is what they are saying about Goat versus Fish. What? How could they believe this about Goat versus Fish? How could they believe this about Goat versus Fish?
Yeah, they'll say anything for ratings. It's all about who's looking at the fence.
Yes, but look at who's looking at Goat versus Fish and Victor Martinez on stereo. Three. The Lame Fence Media can't beat that versus. We have three right here in the verses of stereo. Thank you for joining the stereo verses of Goat versus Fish and Victor Martinez. Thank you for listening on the Goat versus Fish podcast. If you are listening after the verses and you want to join in on this verses, Tuesday verses, 10 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can join in the verses just like Secretariat Goat Worm, just like Secretariat Fish, It's Nail, just like Chris Fumagalli and Took and DJ D_JLM. You can join the Goat and Fish. You can be part of this verses celebration.
Right.
There are now 6. Yes, continuation.
All these stereo verses are recorded in front of a live stereo audience. And you can be part of the audience every Tuesday night on stereo. Just follow Goat versus Fish on stereo.
Celebration. 7 verses. It looks like the verses. Ooh, we are wondering if It's Neo the Fish and Worm the Goat are going at the verses. We like this administration of Goat versus Fish. Shaping up to be really Goat versus Fish. Play the next message for Goat versus Fish.
It's getting heated up.
No. Cooler than Goat versus Fish is simply not possible. So let's aim for the best Goat versus Fish we can be. Now the verses, they need a little work. So I then request that It's Neo describe her policies and what she is doing in order to correct our deficiencies as a nation.
Oh my.
D fish in C. Wow. D fish in C. The fish in the sea are causing a deficiency to Goat versus Fish? Whew, that is a versus. That is a Goat versus there.
Big verses coming from the Goat Worm. Big verses.
Let us continue. We like this lively conversation in the cabinetry of Goat versus Fish. Let us continue it. Next verses.
There's so much excitement.
Leave it to a goat to bring scandal into the administration when it's like an hour old.
Scandalous pearl clutching fish, clutching its pearls. Oh, the scandal of goat. Is a pearl a goat or a fish? Is a pearl a goat or a fish? Georgie Porgy Washington. They say your chompers are made of pearls. Are they goat or are they fish? Stop looking at Goat versus Fish like that. Georgie Porgy Washington. You want to have a staring contest with Goat versus Fish? Goat versus Fish will stare you into the verses. Why is Georgie Porgy Washington? Why is the portrait of Georgie Porgy Washington always staring at goat versus fish? Next verses.
It's just like the way they painted it. You know, it's the angle and the lighting. Anyways.
Next verses.
Oh, it won't let me click the button.
Oh, of course. I didn't think to ask it that. I'm so used to most prostitutes smelling fishy. It's quite possible I have canoodled with the fish. Oh, this changes everything.
Wow.
I might have to step down. I may be disgraced the office of something much cooler.
Now you listen here, Worm. You thought that being part of the administration of Goat versus Fish was just going to be all celebrations? There's going to be verses. Worm, we know you are versing with Sneo the Fish, but there's another verses for you. You must go. Now, in this very StereoVs podcast, you must go before the lane fence media, and you must make a statement. And you must express how it is that you are going to remain part of the administration of Goat versus Fish, but you must not apologize for your verses, but you must also make yourself a very likable goat, and you have to do all of these verses in the same verses. You must admit that you did something fancy without admitting that you did something fancy, and never apologizing, but always apologizing, and then you remain part of Goat versus Fish, and celebration it is all for Goat versus Fish. You can do this versus. Yes, Goat? You can do this versus. Yes, Goat? Leave a message here on the StereoVs, your statement to the lame fence media. Do it. Yes, Victor Martinez, yes?
Yeah, send it in. We got plenty of verses to get through. You got plenty of time to make it. Let's see here. Here we go. Next one coming at you.
And also, only a goat would be intimidated by the diversity of this cabinet.
Diversification. Did you hear? Worm the goat in all of its verses, to complaining of the diversification of the cabinetry of Goat versus Fish?
It turns out that was just a goat hiding something.
It is an accusation.
These verses are getting hot. Let's hear the next one.
It's exactly President Goat versus Fish. The more goat you have, the less fishy it is. More goat, less fishy. And everybody knows that nobody is sacrificing anything to fish. Okay? We are all aware that rock and roll is associated with the goat horns. Okay? Those are the horns that they say they're devil horns, they're goat horns. So I am currently, I'm writing that bill as we speak. Going to get a few different senators on board as soon as I get my bribes together. I mean my special interest money. And we should have that on your desk noon tomorrow.
If you wish to bribe Goat versus Fish, go to patreon.com/GoatVsFish and make a contribution to Goat versus Fish. If you wish to influence Goat versus Fish, then follow Goat versus Fish on all social media and send your verses to the Venmo at Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish is not above your influence. You can buy Goat versus Fish. You can buy Goat versus Fish. You can buy Goat versus Fish.
Goat versus Fish.
What is happening to you? Fence sitter, you can, Goat versus Fish, come into Goat versus Fish, communication.
Okay, I thought I had a bad signal right there. Up here high on the fence, you get bad signal sometimes.
Next verses.
You might think so, but it's time to drain the swamp. I ask you, when this particular official was elected in order to educate the nation's youth, I assume, Secretary of Education, in what ways are you educating anyone? Not saying you're not educated. I'm simply saying that you're evil, corrupt, and full of shit.
Wow. Worm says to drain the fishy swamp.
To drain the sea of the fish out of the swamp. Elimination of the fish, and it claimed it really came on strong with the verses there. It came on strong with the verses. What are you doing to education? What are you doing to education? And by the verses, Worm the goat, if you're going to accusation, it's Neo the fish of not being edumacated, then you should really pronounce the verses as edumacation. Edumacation. Don't just conveniently shorten the verses, like you are trying to sit on some short fence as if we won't notice that it is very short and not a long fence that it really is. Look, edumacation. Say it with goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Nice verses. Keeping the verses. And rock and roll goat. They say rock and roll is cool. So yes, goat versus fish. Yes. How about we can make goat versus fish cool with a little bit of. Do you be goat? Do you be fish? Do you be goat? Do you be fish? Goat do be goat. Fish do be fish. Do be goat versus fish. Little bit of rock and roll. Goat versus fish.
Shout out to Fumagalli.
Shout out.
Fumagalli! Choose goat or fish. Shout out complete. Next verses.
Boom.
If she wasn't so scandalous, then possibly things could have gone differently. I, however, am simply upholding our Constitution and the morality that seems to be devoid from Secretary fishy stuff. Very fishy, this one.
Well, there is no good or evil, only goat and fish. Worm the goat, getting in quite a lot of verses. We have not heard a response from Secretary of Education, Fish. Where has gone Fish? Is Fish on official business of goat versus fish?
Secretary, Mrs. Mayo, the mommy shark, ambassador shark, the shark of edumacation, is very calculated. Getting the response ready.
You are fading away, Fence-Sitter. You are fading away. Are you still here with goat versus fish? This verses will be written. We want them to hear you, Fence-Sitter.
Yes. We're still here. Let's keep these verses rolling. But
it's quite true that the diversity has increased. We've never had this kind of variety. It's quite peculiar, sus, you might say, because, as I've stated before, it's quite fishy. We can't get that smell out.
There shall always be diversification. Goat versus fish is all about that diversification. There is goat, there is fish. There is goat, and there is fish, and there is fish, and there is goat. Worm the goat. You knew it was going to be goat versus fish when you came to this versus. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. You who now joined Goat versus Fish. I am Goat versus Fish. This is Victor Martinez. And we are here to ask you if you're a goat or fish, and if you wish to join the administration of precedent Goat versus Fish. Victor Martinez, Jr., your statement on the precedents of Goat versus Fish.
It's very simple. You want to jump on board, goat or fish. Just let us know and tell us why and what you can contribute and what you take, and pledge goat or fish. Celebration.
And follow Goat versus Fish.
The rock and roll verses of which you speak there, my fellow cabinet member Worm, you talk of the goat horns, but do you not understand that every performance ends with the clapping of hands, which is exactly our way of imitating the sound of a fish flopping on the ground, or perhaps even when you flop fish together against one another. Sweet, sweet fish love.
Oh, wow. Fishy applause. The flip-flop of fish hands.
It's Neo the fish claiming applause for fish. Now, this is part of the celebration of Goat versus Fish. Does this mean that every versus they applesauce for Goat versus Fish? It's actually a celebration of fish?
Man, I'll never look at those hands emojis the same.
Stomp your hooves or slap your fins for Goat versus Fish. Nice verses. Nice verses.
Yeah, nice verses.
We have two verses. We are making a return D-fish in C. And we have stomp your hooves. Stomp your hooves.
Stomp your hooves.
And slap your fins. For Goat versus Fish. What of the stomping of the hooves? It's Neo the fish. What of the stomping of the hooves? Do they not celebrate the rock and roll of Goat versus Fish by stomping their hooves in celebration as well? Is this not
a good question?
Is this not a versus? Next message for Goat versus Fish.
Boom.
I feel as though Secretary Department of Education simply is not saying enough to prove her case. It's as if she doesn't care. This is the person we trust to educate our children. If our children model themselves after a fish who simply can't be bothered to leave a comparable amount of messages, not to mention quality, just completely devoid of passion. Not like me. Okay, I love my country. Goat versus fish. All right, especially the goat part. Not so much fish.
Boom.
Loves the goat part, but not so much the fish. Do you think Secretariat Goat Worm can truly love Goat versus Fish if it loves only the goat and not the fish?
Yeah, it's totally possible. I mean, I love Goat versus Fish, and there's not even any fence in there.
True versus.
True
versus. Second question: Do you think Worm the goat is cool?
Super cool about other things or whatever that position was. Other things
it is
that are
the
cool.
Secretariat of something much cooler, but do you think it is being cool? Do you think it is being cool to fish?
Well, no. But, fish aren't cool inherently, supposedly.
You say fish are not cool.
That's what the goat said. I don't know.
That is what the goat said. That is what the goat said.
Who am I to say what's cool? I don't know what's cool here on the fence. The higher you get on some fences, the colder it gets, but that's temperature. I don't know whether or not that's
Goat
cool.
versus Fish. This has been quite an administration. The first verses of Goat versus Fish. There is so much to be done. There are so many verses to do. They are all Goat versus Fish. If you wish to send your messages to Goat versus Fish, your final verses, send them now to Goat versus Fish, to Victor Martinez. We are going to get through these messages for Goat versus Fish, for precedent Goat versus Fish, and then Goat versus Fish will go into seclusion until the next verses of Goat versus Fish on Twitch, and be Goat versus Fish there, and be Goat versus Fish there. Celebration. Let us hear the next messages. Let us hear these messages. We have many messages for Goat versus Fish. This is a celebration. Let us hear
celebration. Let's knock these out. Let's go ahead and just do a message palooza. Boom.
My apologies, kind sir and president. That is the consequence of violating this country's sovereignty, and it's just I take it personal. I do. I take it personal because I love my country. I'm a patriot. I've said I've lobbed some pretty nasty accusations, but they're true. So it happened.
Patriot Goat Worm says beginning
standing by its verses.
Yeah.
standing by its verses. That is a proud goat. That is a proud goat. We do not deny it. We do not deny it. Celebration. Next verses.
Boom.
As a fence sitter, I still remain unoffensiated.
All right. There you go, Chris. Stay on your fence. Stand strong. Proud fence. Proud fence sitter. Here we go.
The strong rhetoric coming out of my compatriot cabinet mender, Worm the Goat, sounds very reminiscent of a certain goat that, though people be fearful to say his name, I'm going to say it now. Old Goth Shitler. Yeah, I said it. That rhetoric sounds like Old Goth Shitler. So I suggest to you, Mr. Goat, that here in Fence America, we do not suffer Shitlerists very well. Mind your mouth.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Goat versus fish. We have not heard that goat spoken of in quite a long verses. Some verses, the goat and fish say that if you even bring up that one, there is actually some conversation about if it is goat or fish. But some say if a goat brings up that verses or a fish brings up that verses, they say that it is the end of the verses. Oh, you have bringing up old Goth Shitler, and it is the end of the verses. Oh, you have no argumentation. But goat versus fish sounds like a fair versus to goat versus fish. What say you, Victor Junior Martinez?
This is just getting excited. So excited. I didn't want to say too much. I could fuel this into another couple of hours of this versus. We could just go on all night about old. I don't even know how to say that. Shitler?
True verses. Next verses.
I feel as though we are using the word diverse incorrectly.
Well, it does have verses in it. It has verses in it. Diverse. Verses. Diverse.
I like it.
Verses.
Like
goat versus fish. Next verses.
It's a good word.
Hey! How y'all doing?
It's working.
I'm doing alright.
Mario 67, doing all right. Are you doing goat or fish all right?
Are you goat or are you fish?
Yeah.
It sounded there were some other musications that were happening there, that it was speaking to goat versus fish, but it had some other verses. We are pleased you are doing all right, but welcome to the united verses of goat versus fish. Are you goat or are you fish? Immigration. Are you goat or are you fish?
I think we need to open up an investigation. We need to look into the matter of slapping fish together in the presence of minors. That's the sick part.
Oh my.
So, gonna do that.
Well, you see, Worm the Goat, the Federation of Bureaucracy of Investigation is now investigation if Georgie Porgy Washington is a goat or a fish, and we expect them to be doing these verses for at least 7 billion more eons of goat versus fish. So if you want to begin another investigation, we shall have to find some verses to contribution to goat versus fish so that we have more verses to open up this investigation. So you should really go to the Patreon of Goat versus Fish and give a couple of verses to Goat versus Fish so we can begin this investigation. That is what Goat versus Fish. But even if you do not, we thank you for being here, for being part of Goat versus Fish. We thank you for being here with Goat versus Fish.
Yes.
Goat versus Fish. You agree with the verses?
I agree. Yeah, I was going to say, go check out the Patreon. Goat versus Fish.
Goat versus Fish. When Goat versus Fish became precedent, we thought that we could just spend all the verses being Goat versus Fish. We are Goat versus Fish, and spreading the verses of Goat versus Fish and trying to make Fence America more of a place of Goat versus Fish. But it turns out that you have to spend half of your versing just raising verses for Goat versus Fish, asking for more contributions for Goat versus Fish. You want it to be about Goat versus Fish, it becomes about asking for contributions for Goat versus Fish. Why is the verses? What fence has been left here? What fence sitter thought it would be a wise verses to make the political verses all about asking for contribution and not about doing the verses of Goat versus Fish?
Yeah, it's all about the campaign. Goat versus Fish. It's who's got better PR, Goat or Fish. You never know. That's all it's about.
Next verses.
Boom.
In terms of the rapidity of my responses, a wise fish once said, he was a very sandy fish, but he said, "The slow blade penetrates the shield." I rest my case.
Celebration. Celebration.
There you go. Celebration. Another verses. Boom.
Yeah, I was gonna say that though I feel a certain way, it's not uncommon for people who happen upon this fine procedure that is playing out for everybody to see. And goat versus fish doesn't seem to be it's not very important to certain people, but we will win them over. We'll explain to them what's so great about goat, and somebody, not me, will explain what's so great about fish. I can't do that. I've been puzzled. I've never understood. I don't know who thought of this, but it's not working out. Goats, we're sure-footed. We like to be up in the Alps and shit. And these fish are at the lowest point of elevation they can be.
Yeah.
We are pleased that you are pondering something cooler. You are pondering something cooler. Yes, goat, you are wise. You are wise to recognition of your goat. But yes, as the secretary of something cooler, yes, you are going to have to bring in some fish. We're going to have to bring in some fish and get the fish to declare their own coolness so they can be goat versus fish, so we can be part of goat versus fish. We think that is the verses.
Yeah, fish have to be kept cold to keep fresh. So, there you go.
Goat versus fish will say this. It's Neo the fish, and Worm the goat. You have been part of this versus. You have been so much part of this versus. If you wish to leave a ditty right now for Goat versus Fish and Victor Martinez to say where to follow you on social media, so it can go in the Goat versus Fish podcast and all can hear where to follow you on social media. You can leave a message and announce your own verses, but you must do it soon. For soon, this first verses of the administration of Goat versus Fish is going to come to the next verses, and it will have been the inauguration of Goat versus Fish. Next verses.
Goat understands. Gonna have my administration do everything for me. I'm going to take a very long vacation. When I come back, I'm gonna sign 5 documents that I have had some criminals write up for me, and it's gonna work out for everyone. Okay, thank you guys.
As you wish, Goat. As you wish. Go now. Did Worm the Goat ever make its non-apology to the press?
Worm the Goat. Strong goat. Powerful goat.
When you have that documentation for Goat versus Fish, you put it right before Goat versus Fish. We will make it written as long as it is Goat versus Fish.
Worm the controversial goat.
Very controversial goat. But here, Goat, a steadfast goat here to versus it's Neo the Fish for the whole verses. Celebration
versus.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Everybody should go to our Patreons or respective web publications and make sure that we benefit financially from our contributions to tonight's festivities. Official proceedings. I found some way to roast fish as I'm doing my job, and I love I just want to say it again. I love my country.
Celebration. It is working. It is doing its job, and also being here with Goat versus Fish. That is a celebration. We should spend more verses with Goat versus Fish. Quit your job and become full-time secretary of something much cooler for Goat versus Fish.
That's right.
But before you do that versus, just have some communication with Goat versus Fish. First, have some communication for Goat versus Fish. Before you do that versus.
coming in, closing out the verses. Final verses coming up.
I need to bring in some goat. Why are more goats not readily available? And I need them to bring it. Can I talk somebody into becoming a goat? I don't know.
It'd be a lot cooler if you did. Convince Victor Jr. Martinez to choose GOAT. Perhaps you should work on that versus. Secretariat of something cooler, getting Victor Martinez off the fence. That would be a cool versus. That would be very cool to GOAT versus Fish. Next versus. Next versus.
So if you wish to stay in touch with me, the Secretary of Education, on all of the social media, you can follow me as The Real It's Nao on Instagram and on TikTok. Hope to see you guys out there. Mwah.
Kissy Fish, celebration for Fish. Thank you, it's Nao the Fish. Thank you for your services, your services to GOAT versus Fish. Thank you for being Secretariat of Education, Fish. And thank you for versing the GOAT. Thank you for versing the GOAT. Versing Worm the GOAT. Celebration. Follow it's Nao the Fish. Celebration.
If GOAT versus Fish would like to follow me on Instagram at WIRM_MILLION, then that would be appropriate. Everybody else, follow me on here. Worm.
Celebration. We shall see GOAT versus Fish. You want to follow from GOAT versus Fish? GOAT versus Fish is precedent. GOAT versus Fish is precedent. You follow GOAT versus Fish. You follow GOAT versus Fish to the end of the verses, and back again. And we shall make it GOAT versus Fish, Follow Worm. Follow It's Nao on the stereo. Follow Victor Martinez. Follow GOAT versus Fish. Follow DJDX_JLM. Follow Took. Follow Chris Fumagalli. Follow all those who are here to be part of GOAT versus Fish, Secretariat of Secretaries, Victor Jr. Martinez. This has been the first verses of the administration of GOAT versus Fish.
It's been a good
What is
one.
your verses to GOAT versus Fish?
This is a very strong verses. We'll be back with another one next week, right around the same time.
GOAT versus Fish. What's this? Right, they're climbing the verses.
Oh no.
They're storming there is no black or white house. They're coming from GOAT versus Fish.